It's July 1st, 1903, and another remarkable event is about to be uncovered by Ariel, Rebecca, and Ali, the Retrospectors.
At 3:16 p.m. today in history in 1903, 60 cyclists set off from a café in Montgeron, just outside Paris, on the first ever Tour de France. And like so many sporting events that we discuss on this show, it all started as a stunt to sell newspapers.
Yeah, this actually has a weird connection to another previous Retrospects episode on the Dreyfus affair, because the Auto Vélo had started off as a competitor to the established sporting newspaper in France, Le Vélo, and that was because Le Vélo had adopted a pro-Dreyfus stance in the Dreyfus affair, which upset conservative advertisers who then wanted to advertise with, a publication that would meet their viewpoint a bit more. And so as the editor
we want to advertise with an anti-Semitic publication.
They're like, how many times can we talk about Dreyfus in the sporting coverage? Yeah, can we have a couple of pages about how the Jews are destroying France, and then we'll go to rugby after that? Yes, it was hard to imagine how that worked, but it was a daily paper, and I think maybe that contributes to it. It's probably quite hard to fill a daily paper without dipping into other topics. The editor of this new paper was Henri de Grange, who was a well-known cyclist, a pioneering cyclist. He'd written a book on racing tactics. In fact, legend has it that he was fired from his first job as a law clerk for cycling to the office in Paris wearing socks that showed the outline of his calves. And although he would later be presented as sort of the mastermind behind the tour because of his prominence and his profile, the idea was actually pitched by one of the paper's junior journalists, Géo Lefebvre. He suggested the idea at a crunch meeting, basically for ideas to save the paper because it wasn't really competing with Le Vélo. He was 26, he was the youngest member of the editorial team, and he later said he came out with the idea of a race around France because he couldn't think of anything else to say.
And also, cycling just really wasn't that popular at this time. And so when the first field of competitors turned up, they were largely drawn by the fact that there was this quite substantial financial reward for the winner of each stage. And so you had, yes, some professional cyclists, but other people who turned up were just enthusiastic amateurs. Many of them came from quite working class backgrounds, and they saw this as an opportunity to change their lives in two ways. One, through the money, but also, I suppose these were kind of people imagining themselves as proto-influencers because they knew that there was going to be exceptionally good newspaper coverage of this entire event due to the fact that it was being covered for the purpose of this particular newspaper. There was no way the newspaper was going to back out of covering it. And so, sure enough, on this day, all of these people, I think there were about 60 of them in total, got underway in the race, really hoping to, one, to come out of it alive because it was such an incredibly grueling thing that had been proposed, but two, to build their fame and fortune.
Yeah, so, what had been proposed was a month-long race. Paris, Lyon, Marseille, Toulouse, Bordeaux, Nantes. That was actually then reduced to 3 weeks to try and up the amount of people that were going to enter. The entry fee was then cut from 20 francs to 10. The overall eligibility rules were relaxed as well. It's like, do you have a bike? Fine. And so they had 60, as you say, who set off on this day. 78 men had signed up, so I don't know what happened to the other 18 on this day.
Realised it was madness, I think.
It's like when you order something online when you've got drunk. I think they probably woke up in the morning and were like, I shouldn't have sent in that application form.
Yeah. But of the 60 riders who started the contest, 3 weeks later, 21 finished, which does tell you how grueling. I mean, it's a really hardcore event, isn't it? But what had happened along the way, of course, is that all of the things that sort of created the Tour de France event that we know now had begun to occur because of the daily press coverage, because it was a sight and a spectacle, because every day you got the sense of the journey they were going on physically, but also emotionally too. Families were turning up on the street to watch. Not just people who knew them, not just people who were curious, but I suppose what you'd call sports fans. And immediately they tapped into this feeling of it feeling distinctly French. Now, obviously, there are international competitors, but it's still the case over 100 years later that most people that have won it are French. It's almost like a festival of Frenchness. And all of that was being laid down even in this earliest race.
Yeah, and I think, it succeeded in its short-term goal Circulation of l'auto-vélo almost tripled from where it had been before the race, and by 1908 it was shifting 250,000 copies a day. But it had a really profound impact, as you're suggesting, on France more broadly, and not just in terms of sport. It did create this patriotic feeling around this event. It got more people interested in cycling, and certainly observing, when the cyclists set off on this day from that café in Montgeron, there were just a few people who turned out, who were probably just friends of some of the riders. By the end, lots of people were turning out, and when the race arrived back in Paris, there was a huge crowd, because in the intervening time, people had become really attached to the story. And some academics have actually suggested that it was coverage of the race, and the race route in particular, that was the first time many French people had actually properly studied the outline of the country. There weren't really a lot of pictures in atlases at this time, but people were looking every single day at the map of France in the newspaper following this route. And it's thought that this contributed to, if you've ever heard the nickname l'hexagone, the hexagon, sort of very common nickname in French for France, that wasn't really a thing before, and it became popular sort of in the middle decades of the 20th century. And there is a suggestion that it was people becoming more familiar with the shape of France that gave rise to that nickname.
Yeah, and I think they were getting sort of familiar with France and simultaneously really attached to the riders themselves, because particularly as the race progressed, one rider steadily established himself as the strongest. Maurice Garin, who was this Italian-born chimney sweep who'd emigrated to France and became one of the country's leading cyclists. He was nicknamed the Little Chimney Sweep, and he combined the qualities of toughness and tactical intelligence and just remarkable endurance, and he quickly became the man to beat. But also, he was a total character. For one, he very often rode with a cigarette in his mouth, and not only that, but he openly credited his ultimate, spoilers, victory in the competition to his diet during the competition. And the diet that he practiced included red wine, tapioca, hot chocolate, and oysters. And could there be a more French way of coming at this?
To the French.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's like when you have shit your guts out at the side of the road after consuming all of this, you're light as a feather for the next day.
Well, he did the whole thing in 94 hours, 33 minutes and 14 seconds. Worth mentioning the vehicle, though. A completely unremarkable, by modern eyes, plain black commuter bike. No gears, no brakes for 3 weeks. And won 6,075 francs. Although his reputation didn't really hold, because he was disqualified a few years later from the same race. History doesn't exactly record why. Some ragamuffins have suggested that he got on a train for part of the journey, but I find that hard to believe. But certainly what happened by year 2, once this was a thing, was it all got a bit wacky races. People were putting nails on the track. There were competitors jumping into cars. They tried to stop people cheating by saying you can only race in daylight, so that at least you're witnessed during the race. But it's funny to look at now from a modern perspective, where obviously drug taking has been the thing that has provided scandal in the last few decades. But even then, people were taking cocaine, chloroform, and even dynamite to help them along the way.
Yeah, and the injuries were off the charts, because sabotage of other riders' bikes was endemic. And actually, in that second race in 1904, Garin and one of his teammates were ambushed and attacked by masked men in a car. Afterwards, he said, "If I'm not murdered before we reach Paris, I'll win the Tour de France again." But he ended up being one of the 12 people disqualified. Apparently, one of the sneakiest tactics was to attach a superfine wire to the bumper of a car, and that would be attached then to a cork that the rider concealed in his mouth, and then you would be dragged along by the car. But I do think if you had a car driving not that far in front of you for any length of time, people would start to be suspicious. The thing that Garin definitely did in that second race that attracted flack was that he asked Gilles Lefebvre, the race director, for food during a stage which was against the rules, and it was given to him because he was the star rider. And I will say, Garin, I think the Little Chimney Sweep nickname may be a little bit deceptive. He was not what you call a sportsman, even in this first Tour de France. He was in the fifth stage. He was he was in the lead. He was riding with a few close pals. There were no teams at this time. Teams weren't allowed, but he was basically the leader of the team, and they weren't really trying to beat him. They saw him as the leader. He was obviously being lined up as the hero of the hour, but they were riding with one other guy who was at the front with them, Fernand Montgeron, and he made it clear that he was still competing. He wasn't going to be holding back so Garin could win. So Garin got one of his teammates to ram him off his bike twice, Both times Augereau got back on and caught up. Then Garin himself knocked him off, grabbed the bike and smashed it until the back wheel was bent. This was witnessed by a spectator who was so horrified that they loaned Augereau their own bike, and only the fact that he then got a double flat prevented him from catching up again. You suspect that the double flat was probably because Garin and his friends had put nails on the road or something.
And it's worth saying, by the way, that even though Garin was stripped of his 1904 win, his 1903 victory still stands to this day, and he died decades later as a hero in France, maybe even because of the cheating. I mean, it's kind of hilarious.
They'll say the same about Lance Armstrong in a century's time. You'll see.
Tomorrow.
A trip from Germany to Brazil would set you back about £8,000 in today's money.
Ditch the ads and get a Sunday episode when you join Club Retrospectors. Patreon.com/retrospectors.